Skynet built weapons to wipe out every last human on Earth, but humans stole that technology and turned it right back against the machines. Today, I'm breaking down every resistance weapon in the Terminator franchise, starting with the rifle that proved humanity could fight back on equal footing. M25 Plasma Pulse Gun. The M25 is basically humanity's middle finger to Skynet, and it's beautiful. This is the weapon resistance engineers built specifically to go toe-to-toe with Terminator units, incorporating phased plasma technology that matches the destructive output of Skynet's own arsenal. You see it in the future war sequences of the original Terminator, where resistance fighters are running ambush operations through the ruins of 2029 Los Angeles. They're not cowering, they're hunting. Here's what makes the M25 so significant. This isn't some scavenged pre-war relic. This is reverse-engineered Skynet tech. Humans looked at the weapons being used to exterminate them, figured out how they worked, and built their own versions. That's not desperation. That's technological parity achieved under the worst conditions imaginable. But here's where it gets complicated. Nobody actually knows how many of these things existed. The manufacturing capacity required to produce plasma weaponry in bombed-out bunkers is, you know, not ideal. Whether every squad got one is a completely different question. What we do know is that the M25 set the tone for everything that followed. It proved humans weren't just hiding in tunnels waiting to die. They were building an arsenal. But if you think a plasma pulse gun was enough to level the playing field, wait until you hear about the weapon that became legendary thanks to one very desperate soldier and a gun store clerk who had zero idea what he was being asked for. Phased plasma rifle in the 40-watt range. This is the most famous weapon in the entire Terminator franchise, and it technically only exists because of one line of dialogue. The T-800 walks into a gun shop in 1984, asks for a phased plasma rifle in the 40-watt range, gets a blank stare from the shop owner, and accidentally creates the most iconic sci-fi weapon reference in movie history. That's it. That's the origin story. Here's the thing. That single line did more world building than most films accomplish in 2 hours. The 40-watt range is one of the only precise technical specifications given in the original Terminator regarding future weaponry. It doesn't say a big gun. It asks for an exact model with an exact output, which tells you both sides knew which configurations worked. The 40-watt output was likely the minimum threshold for punching through endoskeleton plating, basically the smallest gun that could still kill the thing trying to kill you. And despite being born from a throwaway moment, this weapon shows up everywhere. Terminator 2's future war sequences have resistant soldiers wielding plasma rifles against HK aerials during the final push on Skynet's facilities. The plasma discharge from resistance rifles looks suspiciously similar to what Terminator units fire, which means the resistance almost certainly reverse-engineered Skynet's own technology and pointed it right back at them. One line. An entire weapons class. Not bad for 40 watts. But if plasma rifles were the Resistance's answer to Terminators, they still had zero answers for what came rolling in on treads. TV-1 dual miniguns. This is where the war stopped being theoretical. The T-1 is one of Skynet's earliest ground-based combat units, and it's about as subtle as you'd expect from a tank-sized death machine carrying 2 miniguns. Not 1, 2. Because apparently one stream of hundreds of rounds per minute just wasn't getting the job done. The T-1 first shows up in Terminator 3, where we see these things rolling through cyber research systems before Judgment Day even fully kicks off. What's immediately obvious is that these things don't fight like individual soldiers. They hunt in packs. Coordinated, tactical, relentless. They push through corridors, open terrain, wherever humans try to set up, and they turn it into a kill zone. The dual minigun setup isn't about hitting one specific target. It's about making an entire area uninhabitable. Skynet's early ground doctrine was basically suppress everything. Let the math sort it out, and the math was brutal. Resistance fighters went from organized military formations to scattered guerrilla cells almost overnight because standing in a group meant dying in a group. You can't hold a defensive line when the thing rolling toward you never gets tired, never flinches, and is putting more lead downrange than your entire squad combined. Here's the thing though, the T-1 wasn't the end game, it was the foundation. Every Terminator that came after, the T-600, the T-800, all of it traces back to what Skynet learned from these rolling gun platforms. The T-800 eventually made them obsolete, sure, but for the early stretch of the war, the T-1 was the nightmare. Speaking of what came next, the T-600 took that minigun concept and strapped it to something far more unsettling. T-600 minigun. The T-600 is what happens when a supercomputer's first attempt at building a human disguise looks like it was done by someone who's never actually seen a human. Rubber skin stretched over a metal endoskeleton, eyes that don't quite sit right, movements that scream, "I am absolutely a machine pretending to be your friend." As an infiltrator, it's a complete failure. Nobody is fooled by this thing up close, not for a second. But here's the thing, it doesn't actually need to fool you when it's carrying a minigun. The T-600 shows up most prominently in Terminator Salvation, and what it lacks in subtlety, it makes up for in sheer sustained violence. These units are powered by onboard fusion cells, which means the minigun never runs dry. Think about that for a second. Human resistance fighters are rationing every bullet, counting every magazine, planning supply runs that get people killed. Meanwhile, the T-600 just keeps firing indefinitely. That's not a small tactical edge. That's a logistics nightmare for anyone standing on the other side. What makes the T-600 genuinely interesting from a design standpoint is what it tells us about Skynet's priorities. This is a transitional platform. It's still using conventional ballistic ammunition rather than plasma, which suggests Skynet hadn't yet scaled plasma weapon manufacturing to the point where every unit could carry one. Even a genocidal AI has supply chain problems apparently. And despite the terrifying firepower, the T-600 had real weaknesses: slower reaction times, predictable movement patterns, targeting systems that skilled resistance fighters learned to exploit. It was a rough draft, a prototype that could absolutely shred you, but a prototype nonetheless, which is almost comforting until you look up and see what Skynet put in the sky. HK aerial plasma cannons. The HK aerial didn't just kill people, it decided where people were allowed to exist, and the answer was nowhere above ground. These hunter-killer platforms gave Skynet something the Resistance had zero answer for: total air superiority. Variable geometry wings let them switch between high-altitude patrol and low-altitude attack runs, and they've been terrorizing audiences since the original 1984 film. Every future war sequence features these things drifting through scorched skies like mechanical vultures with plasma cannons bolted to their bellies. Here's the thing, the Resistance had no functioning aircraft, no anti-air systems, nothing. When an HK aerial locked onto your position, your options were hide or die. That's it. Those plasma cannons operated on power reserves that made handheld Resistance weapons look like flashlights at a bonfire. Rapid successive discharges, minimal recharge time, and enough sustained firepower to turn an entire Resistance outpost into a smoking crater before anyone could scramble for cover. But the real devastation wasn't just the body count, it was the behavioral change. These platforms forced the entire human resistance underground. Literally, every tunnel network, every buried bunker, every thermal signature masking technique the Resistance developed exists because of these things. Humanity stopped building up and started digging down. Skynet didn't just win the sky, it erased the sky as a place humans could occupy. Precision strikes against identified targets, suppressive fire across entire grid squares, reconnaissance that fed coordinates directly into plasma cannon targeting systems. The HK aerial was judge, jury, and executioner, and it never needed to land. The sky became hostile territory, which is, you know, not ideal when you're a species that lived under it for 200,000 years, but at least the threat stayed airborne. The ground-based version was somehow worse. HK tank dual repeaters. If the HK aerial is the thing you never see coming, the HK tank is the opposite problem entirely. You can hear this one from miles away. The ground shaking, treads grinding through rubble, that low mechanical drone getting louder and louder, and there's still absolutely nothing you can do about it. These are massive tracked autonomous platforms, and calling them tanks is almost generous. A tank implies something a crew operates, something that needs to stop, refuel, rotate shifts. HK tanks need none of that. They roll continuously, they fire continuously, and they coordinate with each other like a hive mind executing a playbook no human commander could keep up with. The dual repeater system is the real nightmare. Two independent weapon mounts firing in overlapping patterns, which means there is zero gap in suppressive fire. None. Resistance fighters relying on the old wait for a pause and move approach learned exactly one lesson from that strategy, and they learned it posthumously. The dual repeaters turn open ground into a death sentence and defensive positions into temporary coffins. You're not fighting fighting back. You're just choosing where you die. And Skynet kept improving the armor. Every time the Resistance developed a new anti-armor weapon, the next generation of HK tanks rolled out with plating specifically designed to counter it. That's not just manufacturing. That's an arms race against an opponent with infinite patience and a factory that never closes. But the psychological damage might be worse than the physical. These things don't hesitate. They don't get tired. They don't make emotional decisions. They just advance, firing the entire time with tactical persistence that makes human endurance look like a joke. Conventional defense against an HK tank isn't brave. It's suicide. But as terrifying as a rolling wall of firepower is, it's still an external threat. Something you can see, something you can run from. The TX doesn't give you that luxury. TX integrated plasma cannon. Here's where Skynet stops fighting humans and starts fighting itself. The TX from Terminator 3 wasn't built to hunt resistant soldiers. It was built to hunt Terminators, specifically the T-800s that the Resistance kept capturing, reprogramming, and sending right back at Skynet like a return to sender package full of machine gun arms. Think about that for a second. Skynet's own weapons were being turned against it so effectively that it had to design an entirely new Terminator whose primary job was killing other Terminators. That's not just an arms race. That's an existential crisis with a plasma cannon bolted onto it, and what a cannon it is. The TX's plasma weapon isn't strapped on, swapped out, or carried like a lunchbox. It's built directly into the machine's architecture. The targeting system and the weapon system are the same system, which means zero lag between identifying a target and vaporizing it. Every T-800 that came before had to coordinate separate components. The TX just thinks and fires. One process. The power output exceeds anything the Resistance had in their arsenal, with sustained firing capability and thermal management that let it keep shooting long after conventional weapons would have melted themselves into expensive paperweights. Combine that with liquid metal components layered over an advanced endoskeleton, and you've got a machine that makes the T-800 look like a calculator with legs. We see exactly how outmatched the Model 101 is when these two collide. The T-800 sent to protect John Connor gets absolutely dismantled. Not outsmarted, not tricked, just overpowered by a machine specifically engineered to destroy everything the T-800 is. Skynet looked at its own creation and said, I need to build something that kills that, which is, you know, not ideal for workplace morale. But the TX wasn't even the biggest thing Skynet rolled off the assembly line. Harvester plasma cannon. Picture a building that can walk. Now give it a cannon that never runs out of ammunition. That's a harvester. These things stand over 20 feet tall on 4 articulated legs, and they don't just fight the Resistance, they harvest it. The name tells you everything you need to know about how Skynet views humanity at this point. You're not an enemy, you're a resource. The harvester serves a triple function that makes it one of the most terrifying things Skynet ever produced. It's a mobile command center coordinating machine forces across entire regions. It's a human processing hub, scooping up survivors for whatever nightmare Skynet has planned next. And it's a weapons platform carrying turret-mounted plasma cannons with a power output that makes your Resistance plasma rifle look like a flashlight taped to a stick. Here's the thing, a single directed volley from a harvester can level a large structure. Entire settlements, gone in one shot. You could empty every plasma rifle in your squad into a harvester simultaneously, and it still wouldn't match what this thing puts out in a single trigger pull. But the real nightmare is the legs. That four-legged biomimetic design lets harvesters cross terrain that would stop any conventional military vehicle dead. Debris fields, vertical surfaces, water obstacles, doesn't matter. There's nowhere to hide that a harvester can't reach. And because those plasma cannons draw power directly from the harvester's onboard fusion reactor, instead of consuming discrete ammunition, it never needs to resupply, ever. It just keeps walking and keeps shooting until everything in front of it stops moving. Imagine standing in a bombed out building with a plasma rifle, watching something the size of a 4-story apartment complex step over a collapsed highway and point its cannon at you. That's not a fight. That's an extinction event with legs. But at least the harvester has the decency to be loud enough that you can hear it coming. The next weapon on this list doesn't even give you that courtesy. Hydrabot pincer claws. Every other weapon on this list shoots you. Plasma bolts, miniguns, heavy repeater arrays, arrays, all ranged, all designed to kill you from a distance. Hydrobots don't do that. Hydrobots grab you and snap you in half underwater where nobody can hear it happen. These things are Skynet's answer to a problem most people never considered. Humans figured out pretty quickly that land was a death trap. The skies belonged to HK aerials. Underground bunkers got found eventually, so some resistance cells took to the water. Rivers, lakes, coastlines, anywhere the machines couldn't easily follow. Reasonable strategy. Skynet's response was, essentially, that's cute. Hydrobots are purpose-built aquatic killers with pressure vessel architectures designed for deep water operations and hydrodynamic profiles optimized for underwater speed. They don't look like Terminators. They look like something that crawled out of a nightmare about the ocean. Here's where it gets interesting. Their primary weapon isn't the plasma cannon. It's not an energy weapon at all. The pincer claw systems on these things generate crushing force, potentially reaching hundreds of tons. One application, a single closing motion, and a human body becomes two separate pieces of a human body, which is, not ideal. And that weapon choice isn't random. Skynet recognized that plasma weapons face massive dissipation problems underwater. Energy bolts lose coherence. Hydrodynamic interference ruins targeting. So instead of making guns work in an environment guns hate, Skynet went full prehistoric and built giant mechanical claws that just physically destroy whatever they grab. No energy loss, no beam scatter, just raw crushing force applied directly to whoever thought water meant safety. The psychological element is what really sells it. Every other Skynet weapon kills you clinically. A plasma bolt hits, and you're gone. But Hydrobots hunt you in the dark, in the water, where you can barely see and can't breathe, and they close those claws around you like you're nothing. That's not warfare. That's a horror movie. But if underwater nightmares represent Skynet's most creative problem solving, the Centurion HK takes the opposite approach entirely. No adaptation required, just pure, overwhelming force. Centurion HK Heavy Plasma Arrays. This is the final boss, the end of the line. The Centurion Hunter Killer is the single most devastating weapons platform Skynet ever built, and it's not particularly close. This thing makes a harvester look like a household appliance. Multiple independent heavy plasma cannon systems, all firing in coordinated patterns, all controlled by a single autonomous intelligence that doesn't blink, doesn't hesitate, and doesn't miss. The Centurion could engage dozens of targets simultaneously across vast distances, or it could focus every single array on one hardened position and turn it into a memory. Whichever option ruins your day faster, basically. Skynet reserved these things for the fights that actually mattered. Major fortified resistance bases, large-scale troop concentrations, the engagements where Skynet looked at the situation and said, I want that gone. Not suppressed, not damaged, gone. And the engineering behind it is genuinely staggering. The Centurion represents the accumulated knowledge of every weapon system that came before it. Every failed T-600 patrol, every HK aerial sortie, every harvester deployment, all of that tactical data fed back into Skynet's design philosophy until it produced something that shouldn't lose. Decades of material science, power generation refinement, and targeting evolution compressed into one platform that exists purely to end arguments. But here's the thing, it didn't work. Despite being the most powerful weapon in Skynet's entire arsenal, the Centurion still had weaknesses. Power generation infrastructure that could be targeted, targeting systems that could be disrupted, movement mechanisms that could be exploited by fighters small enough and crazy enough to get close. The Resistance figured it out. They always figured it out. And that's the real story of Skynet's weapons hierarchy. From plasma rifles to Centurion arrays, every single system was designed to solve one problem: humans who refused to die. Skynet built bigger guns, faster platforms, smarter targeting systems. It threw everything it had at a species fighting with scraps and desperation, and it still lost. Not because the Resistance had better weapons, because they had something Skynet could never manufacture: adaptability, stubbornness, the absolute refusal to stay down. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes the ants win. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.